Before the engagement, I received a gift from my girlfriend's childhood friend. It was a black whip and a video. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank, but in the next second, the content of the video left me speechless. My once aloof and dignified girlfriend had lost every bit of her pride. As I stood there in shock, Makoto laughed brazenly. He said, "Did you really think she loved you? This is already my 13th whip." Chapter 1. In the middle of intimacy, Willow's brows furrowed slightly, and her body trembled uncontrollably. I glanced at her and asked, "Maybe we should stop for today." She had always been a little distant, even in her dependence on me, cold with a touch of tenderness. So, even beyond our daily life, during moments of pleasure, we maintained a respectful distance, always careful not to hurt her. In this area, we were never quite in sync. Willow released her arms around me, softly smiled, and said, "Yeah, let's stop here for today. I'll take a shower and freshen up. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep." Then she gathered her silk clothes and gracefully slid off the bed. The sleeve of her silky robe accidentally brushed against her milky white leg, tracing an arc. She stood up, beads of sweat on her jade-like back glistening under the light, as she floated into the bathroom. After a while, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the phone ring. Willow whispered something, then gently said to me, "Honey, my dad needs something. I have to step out for a bit, but I'll be back soon." I was too tired, so I nodded absent-mindedly and quickly fell back asleep. I don't know how much time passed before my phone suddenly rang. The sharp ringtone yanked me out of a deep sleep, and I groggily reached for my phone. It was a call from Willow. "Hello, what's wrong?" There was no sound for a long time on the other end. "Hello, hello." After a brief pause, I could hear faint breathing and the continuous sound of something whipping through the air, making crisp snapping noises. I jolted awake. "Willow, what's going on?" A few seconds later, Willow's voice came through. "Nothing's wrong." In the quiet of the night, her voice sounded distorted, with a soft moan of restraint. "Nothing. I just tripped going up the stairs. Honey, I miss you so much." I felt a warmth in my heart, and a smile crept onto my lips as I playfully complained. "Why are you so clingy? You've only been gone for a little while, and you already miss me." There was silence on the other end. After a long pause, Willow finally spoke, but her voice trembled for some reason. She said, "Yeah." Chapter 2. The next morning, Willow finally came back. She stumbled in, collapsing onto the sofa as if she had been through a battle. Seeing her in this state, I leaned against the bathroom door and sighed. "Did your dad have some urgent matter again that kept you working all night? If I had known, I would have gone with you." Willow, looking pitiful, got up and hugged me, burying her face in my chest as she complained. "Dad said I rely on you too much. He wanted to use this chance to toughen me up." I was about to speak when my eyes suddenly narrowed. There was a small, conspicuous red mark on Willow's neck, in a rather intimate spot. Noticing my gaze, Willow tilted her head slightly, her slender fingers brushing aside a stray lock of hair as she gently touched the reddish mark. She said, "There were so many mosquitoes at the office last night. I got bitten a few times." Her fingertips pressed lightly, leaving a faint trace. She continued, "It's still itchy. Do we have any anti-itch cream at home?" I hesitated for a moment. The placement of that mark was too coincidental, and the shape made it hard not to think otherwise. But how could that be? Willow and I had been together for so many years, and she had never strayed. She was always devoted to me, so how could she betray me? After all these years, I should trust her, but for some reason, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling deep inside. "I'm off to work," she said. As she spoke, she casually draped a light blue shawl over her shoulders at the entrance. The delicate fabric skimmed her shoulders, creating soft ripples, adding a touch of innocence to her look. Beneath the shawl, a pearl-white dress accentuated her graceful waistline. She glanced at herself in the mirror for a moment, her clear eyes curving with a faint smile as they reflected off the cold surface, drawing a soft boundary between the foyer and the living room. She stepped lightly across that boundary, approached me, stood on tiptoes, and gave me a quick peck like a playful little bird. Without looking back, she crossed the threshold and slipped out the door. After Willow left, I sank into the sofa, lost in thought. A WeChat notification popped up, showing a friend request. The man in the profile picture was someone I knew. It was Makoto, Willow's childhood friend. I was puzzled. Why was he suddenly adding me? Makoto and Willow had grown up together, but Willow didn't like him much anymore. Whenever they happened to meet at social events, she'd quickly avoid him like he was a pest. She once told me that Makoto had lived recklessly while studying abroad, playing around and abandoning girls, hurting many in the process. She said, "That guy is a psycho. Don't ever be like him, honey." That's what she said. Indeed, the few times I had met him, Makoto always had different women around him, clinging to him like leashed cats, with a hint of unwilling submission in their eyes. Even with a companion by his side, Makoto never missed a chance to flirt with other women, teasing them openly in front of his partner. The cats, stripped of their freedom, seemed even more resigned yet somehow more eager to please. Truth be told, Makoto's features were rather ordinary, the kind that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Yet, he had a certain aura about him. If you wanted to be polite, you'd call it charming. If not, it was downright sleazy, especially when he smiled, oozing with a sinister allure. Many women were drawn to Makoto, but Willow found him disgusting. Whenever he tried to approach, she would coldly push him away. Once, when Makoto tried to chat with her, she unceremoniously shut him down. "Please stay away from me. The smell of something rotten makes me want to vomit." It was clear she genuinely disliked him. Yet, Makoto never gave up chasing Willow. No matter how many times he was rejected, he remained persistent, as if he relished the challenge. Whenever Willow was around, his eyes were always fixed on her. I had heard from people in our social circle that Makoto had liked Willow since they were kids, confessing to her several times during school, only to be turned down. Just looking at this sleaze for a second was a waste of my time. I was certain that Willow was wholly devoted to me. But this time, I opened his Moments feed. His latest post had been shared at 4 in the morning. It showed a woman in a half-mask holding a phone, her neck adorned with a black collar. She was sitting on a bathroom counter, her back partially turned to the mirror, with smudged lipstick making her features unrecognizable. All that was clear were her alluring eyes. In the mirror, her bare, flawless back was crisscrossed with shallow whip marks, giving off an air of cruel beauty. The caption read, "Forever belongs to the master." Chapter 3. That night, I told Willow about Makoto adding me. Willow quickly scrolled through our chat history, and after seeing only 2 short lines, she let out a small sigh of relief. Then, with a look of disgust, she said, "Who knows what nonsense he's up to again? Just ignore him." I still felt something was off and was about to ask more, but Willow snuggled into my arms and playfully poked my chin. "All right, let's go to bed early. You don't want to be too tired to help me pick out my wedding dress tomorrow, do you?" I didn't sleep well that night. I had dreams nonstop, one after another, without a moment of peace. When I woke up, my body felt exhausted, but I couldn't remember a single thing from the dreams. That evening, some friends invited us out to dinner to celebrate our upcoming engagement. During the meal, everyone was offering us their congratulations. 5 years of dating. And finally, George gets the girl. "You're one lucky man. You two are a perfect match. May your love last forever. Let's raise our glasses to the happy couple." Just as everyone lifted their glasses, the door suddenly swung open. Makoto walked in, wearing a black trench coat, and everyone froze. Everyone knew that Makoto had always liked Willow, so no one had invited him, thinking it was best to avoid any awkwardness. How he found out and came on his own, no one knew. The smile faded from Willow's face, and she bit her lip, asking, "What are you doing here?" Makoto brushed his hair back, and though his appearance was ordinary, he carried a unique confidence. He smiled and said, "How could you not tell me about something as big as your engagement? After all, we've been..." He paused for a moment before continuing. "We've known each other for so many years." Sensing the tension, our friends quickly tried to smooth things over. "Come on, have a seat over here. We didn't want to bother you since we know how busy you are, but it's great you came. Let's have a drink." That night, Makoto drank constantly, reminiscing about his past with Willow. Don't be fooled by how cold she is now. Back in school, she was the sweetest thing. My family was poor then, and she used to share her breakfast with me every day. We even shared the same carton of milk. Half for her, half for me. Ha ha ha. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with provocation and disdain, not bothering to hide it. Our friends were clearly uncomfortable, responding with half-hearted comments. Willow stayed silent the entire time, not giving Makoto even a glance. Makoto's one-man show grew more ridiculous, and by the end, he was drunkenly gulping down drinks, slurring through stories until he was thoroughly wasted. He stared at Willow for a long time. Willow, noticing my empty glass, gently covered it and softly said, "Honey, don't drink too much. Eat something, or your stomach will hurt." With that, she ladled a bowl of soup for me. Makoto suddenly let out a bitter laugh, staggering to his feet before stumbling out the door. Willow's expression remained calm, but after being together for so long, I could see a trace of irritation in her eyes. I asked, "What's wrong, Willow? Do you have something on your mind?" Willow replied, "Nothing." But as time passed and Makoto didn't return, Willow began unconsciously picking at her fingers until she finally stood up. She said, "Honey, I'm going to the bathroom." By then, most of our friends were already passed out, slumped over in their chairs, but Willow still hadn't come back. I went out to look for her, and that's when I saw Makoto, drunk and grabbing the wrist of a young waitress, harassing her and trying to drag her outside. The girl wasn't strong enough to push him off. Just as I was about to intervene, a figure rushed forward and slapped Makoto hard across the face. The waitress fled, and Makoto, stunned, fell to the ground. He was about to shout in anger, but when he looked up and saw Willow, he simply shook his head and slowly got to his feet, muttering complaints. Willow's face was flushed with rage, her eyes blazing with jealousy. I had no doubt she wanted nothing more than to tear Makoto apart at that moment. In front of me, she was always gentle and kind, and in front of others, she was always cool and dignified. I had never seen her like this. I stood frozen at a distance, watching as Willow yanked at Makoto's sleeve, screaming hysterically. Are you naturally this much of a scumbag? Do you never turn down any woman? If I hadn't come just now, were you planning on taking her home? Makoto stared at her for a long time before suddenly letting out a sad laugh and pulling her into a tight embrace. I thought she would push him away, but she didn't. After a brief pause, Willow buried her head into his chest, like a cat bound by a leash. That night, I went home alone. She said Makoto was too drunk to be left alone and that she would take him home and come back after. But I sat on the sofa until morning, and she never returned. It wasn't until afternoon that she finally came back. She said, Makoto was so drunk last night. After all, we grew up together. If something happened to him, I wouldn't be able to face his parents. She hugged my arm, her dark eyes filled with affection, and said, Honey, there's really nothing between me and him. Don't be upset, okay? Just as I was about to say something, I caught a glimpse of her bag, noticing that one of the outer pockets was bulging. I reached in, and when I saw what it was, I froze. It was an open box of condoms. Chapter 4. The day before the engagement. I sat on a bench, staring blankly at the hall we had spent countless days and nights preparing, imagining what it should look like tomorrow. The hall now seemed vast and eerily quiet. The crisscross light from the golden wall sconces cast shadows that etched cracks into the lampshades, while the densely packed roses and lilies emitted a sickly sweet, suffocating scent. The deep red velvet curtains were thick and opaque, though the bottom edges had faded. Memories clouded by shadows played in my mind, their echoes dragging like muddy boots. That day, my friend Chinzei said to me, Your fiancée is so beautiful, brother. You're really lucky to marry her. For no reason, I just looked at him, unable to say a word. The thought of that box kept resurfacing in my mind. When it came to that box of condoms, Willow's explanation was that Makoto had purposely planted it in her bag. She said Makoto had always had ill intentions toward her, jealous of our engagement, and was trying to sabotage our relationship. She was so sincere in her explanation, swearing that I was the only one she ever loved, and the hurt in her eyes seemed too real to be faked. After so many years together, I had always trusted her. Willow had never betrayed me. How could it be possible? How could I draw such an absurd conclusion? I should be ashamed for not trusting my future wife, the girl who shared every little moment of her life with me, the girl who longed to have me by her side every day, the gentle and caring woman who stayed up all night looking after me when I was sick. And yet, a part of me seemed to split off, a shadow that coldly mocked me for deceiving myself. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, with solid ground beneath my feet, but at any moment, a gust of wind could send me plummeting into an endless abyss. Maybe it wasn't that I couldn't figure it out, but rather that I didn't want to. 5 years of love, built word by word, brick by brick, couldn't just fall apart like this. I shook my head and pushed myself up from the bench, but as I turned, I froze. Makoto was standing behind me, though I hadn't noticed when he appeared. His slightly square face was pale, his cheap suit wrinkled, and his tie poorly fastened. I instinctively frowned and asked, What are you doing here? Makoto was holding a black gift box, smiling as he handed it to me. He said, I came to give you an engagement gift. The box landed in my hand, featherlight. Oddly, my hands began to tremble at that moment, as if some part of me already knew what fate awaited inside. Makoto looked down at me with a strange smile tugging at his lips. Not going to open it? He asked. My stiff fingers slowly pried open the box. Inside lay a black leather whip. In that instant, my heart became strangely calm, as though all my emotions and thoughts had evaporated, leaving nothing but the sight of the whip in front of me. Makoto said, Do you really think Willow loves you? He leaned on the back of the bench, malice gleaming in his eyes. Every weekend you spend with her, I come by to fix her. You didn't know, did you? My gaze went blank, and I murmured, Impossible. The woman I had shared a bed with for over 1,000 nights couldn't be that kind of person. Makoto chuckled softly and placed his phone in front of me. I knew you wouldn't believe me. See for yourself. He played a video. The screen wobbled for a moment before focusing on a woman wearing a mask. The mask was removed, and there it was, the face I would recognize even if it were turned to ashes. It was Willow, the same Willow who kissed me every morning. Now, she was a fragile, submissive figure, as vulnerable as meat on a butcher's block, with none of the person I knew in sight. Makoto rolled up his sleeves, the whip whistling through the air, and Willow, her face flushed, looked intoxicated by it all. The whip in Makoto's hand was the same one that now lay before me. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, Makoto moved in front of Willow, his face twisted with a cold excitement. Looking down at her, his voice was indifferent as he asked, "Still going to argue? Still going to stop me from seeing other women?" Makoto removed her restraints. Willow looked up at him obediently, her voice trembling as she replied, "No more arguing. Makoto can see as many women as he wants." Makoto watched her for a moment, a smile of satisfaction spreading across his face. He patted Willow's cheek and said, "Good girl." Makoto turned off the phone and pointed at the box. "Do you really know her? Do you know her fetishes? Did you know that she once told me that every time with you was as bland as drinking plain water?" He squatted down, a wicked smile playing on his lips as he looked me in the eye. "She belongs to me. We're the perfect match. George, you don't even know who your fiancé really is. Do you know what she was doing when she called you that night? I don't even need to say it, do I? That call was just part of our game. That night, after I took her home, I was furious that she tried to stop me from picking up another girl. You saw that box, right? I only have one left." He narrowed his eyes, smug. "You were never supposed to be with her. I'm the one who." He was cut off. The door swung open, and Willow froze when she saw the whip in my hand. I stiffly raised my head, snapping back to reality. I tasted the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I wiped my lips and looked down. My thumb was covered in blood. At some point, I had bitten through my own lip. Chapter 5. In the next second, I turned and punched Makoto square in the mouth. He staggered back but, instead of getting angry, he laughed. Willow ignored him and rushed over to grab my arm. Panicked, she said, "Honey, listen to me. Let me explain." I flexed my fingers a couple of times, then looked at her calmly and said, "All right, explain." Willow opened her mouth but no words came out. Suddenly, Makoto grabbed the table and started dry heaving, his face turning deathly pale. Willow's face flushed as she yelled, "Makoto, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to drive me to my death?" Makoto smirked and pulled out a white pill bottle, tossing it onto the floor. "Drive you to your death? No, Willow. Before I came to see you, I swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Willow, today you either come with me, or you watch me die right in front of you." Willow picked up the bottle, screaming, "Makoto, are you insane?" Makoto laughed maniacally. "Yes, I'm insane. I'm crazy because I want you so badly. I've chased you for so many years, put so much effort into you, and you wouldn't even give me a second glance. You treated me like I was filth from the gutter, something to be avoided. But now, good girl, you're finished. Even if you won't admit it, deep down, you know you're done. You belong to me, and I'm here to make you realize it. Willow, you wouldn't want to watch me die, would you? You'd feel guilty. You'd suffer for the rest of your life. Your noble heart couldn't handle that, could it? You don't want me gone, because deep down, you know we're the perfect match. Without me, your life would return to the boring, uneventful place it was before. Admit it. You can't bear to lose me." As he spoke, it seemed like he couldn't hold himself up anymore, his body slowly collapsing. Tears welled up in Willow's eyes as she supported him, shouting, "You're a madman. You've really destroyed me." She helped him, step by step, toward the door. "Willow," I called her name. She paused, turning to look at me. The light was behind her, so I couldn't see her expression clearly, but I heard her voice, choked with emotion. "Say one word." "Sorry." Without another glance back, she disappeared through the door with him. I sat in the hall for a long time before I forced myself to stand and leave. The pale gray marble columns reflected a cold, harsh light from the sky, casting a chill into the air. The faint daylight brought no warmth. Instead, it felt like a jagged arrow slowly boring into my chest. My heart, numb as though anesthetized, could only register a dull ache, without any true pain. It felt as though the world had placed a sheet of glass between me and reality. I could see the emotions, joy, anger, sorrow, but I could no longer feel them. Chapter 6. When I got home, I didn't rest. I immediately began packing my things. There was no rush to leave, but I needed to keep myself busy, or else my mind would drive me insane. I had lived in this home for 5 years, and traces of me were everywhere. Moving out wasn't going to be easy. I spent hours packing, and by the time night fell, I had barely made a dent. At some point, it had started raining outside, a steady drizzle. Willow came home. She was still wearing her engagement dress, soaked from the rain, the hem of her gown covered in mud. She stood at the door, watching me pack. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't until I walked past her with my things that she finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, George." I looked at Willow, and in that instant, I understood what she meant. No explanations, that was her answer. We would never be the same again. There would be no one to apologize first, to explain the misunderstanding, or to reveal their deepest feelings, because we both knew this wasn't just a simple argument anymore. She knew I had made my choice, because she had made hers, but I still couldn't understand her decision. It felt like the curtain woven from shadows that had covered my false memories had finally dropped. separating me from the truth. My memories blurred, and confusion began to smother my anger. I squinted at her and asked, word by word, why? 5 years. Even a dog would be loyal after 5 years. She had become a part of my life, and every plan I had for the future included her. I had never doubted we would make it to the end, but reality had played out in the most absurd way possible, hitting me with a heavy blow that made me realize just how foolish I had been. The woman I once thought was a gift from the heavens had, in fact, been sneaking around with another man every week, and she had hidden it so well that I hadn't noticed a thing. When we went to the temple to hang a love charm, what was she thinking while wishing for us to grow old together? Was she thinking about when she could go back to see Makoto? Suddenly, I felt like I was going to be sick. But what was the point in asking why? I already knew the answer. I'm sorry, Willow said, her lashes lowering. But I can't live without him. George, I really do love you, and I genuinely wanted to marry you. But today, I finally realized I can't lose him. He's more important to me than my own life. Strangely, in that moment, all I felt was the urge to laugh. But instead of laughing, I let out a half smile and sighed. I didn't know if I was laughing at how absurd the world could be, or at how foolish I had been. 5 years, and all I got in return was that she couldn't live without him, that he was more important to her than her own life. I didn't say anything else. I pushed open the door and walked out. The door closed behind me, cutting me off from Willow, once and for all. Chapter 7. I quickly resigned from David's company. He didn't try to stop me, only gave me a complicated look before approving my resignation. He even added a large bonus to my final payment. Looking at the numbers in my bank account, I couldn't help but feel it was a bit ridiculous. I had originally planned to stay abroad. I graduated from Stanford, and right after graduating, I was offered a $300,000 a year job at a Wall Street investment firm. But just because Willow asked me to come back and help her, I resolutely gave up the chance at $1 million salary and returned to China. 4 years, I worked at her father's company. Every investment project had to go through me. In those early years, I worked tirelessly to earn her father's trust. We often worked late into the night, then dragged our exhausted bodies home, collapsing into bed. I used to think we weren't just lovers, we were partners, supporting each other like family. I had thanked fate countless times for giving me a soulmate who shared my ambitions. When I overworked myself and fell seriously ill, she cried endlessly, staying up all night by my side, clutching my hand, threatening that if I dared to leave her first, she would follow me. She said she loved me, that she couldn't live without me. But in just 5 years, she no longer needed me at all. It turns out, I never truly saw her for who she was from the beginning. I rented a new apartment. It wasn't as luxurious as the one I used to rent in the city center, but it was more than enough for me alone. I deliberately chose a smaller place because I couldn't bear the silence of a large house anymore. It always reminded me of that hall, vast, quiet, and unsettling. I found out about Willow and Makoto being together from a friend. After hesitating for a long time, he cautiously asked, "Did you know? Willow is with Makoto now." I froze for a moment before I forgot how I even ended the call. The autumn rain fell continuously, carrying a chill that clung to the windows. I should have expected it. It was bound to happen sooner or later, but hearing it confirmed still left me feeling drained, as if all the strength had been sucked out of me, leaving me weak and powerless. From that point on, Makoto began to flaunt their relationship. They went to Akita together to see the fireworks festival. It was the same festival Willow had begged me to take her to. Under those fireworks she had dreamed of so many times, she now held someone else's hand. They went to Disneyland together, kissing in the same spot where Willow and I had once taken pictures. Every trace of me that I had left in her life was slowly being erased. Willow even got Makoto's name tattooed on her chest, the twisted, snake-like letters cutting across her heart, marking her as his. I scrolled through the photos mechanically, unable to even feel a pang in my heart anymore. They seemed happy together, happier than she had ever been with me. Willow eventually reached out to me, calling me one day. She said, How have you been lately?" I didn't say anything, and she sighed before continuing. "George, I'm really sorry. I want to make it up to you. Just tell me what you want, and I'll do anything for you." I knew she wasn't lingering out of affection. She just felt guilty, looking for a way to soothe her conscience so she could move on. It was strange, only a few days had passed since we broke up, yet her voice sounded so unfamiliar to me. I couldn't even remember the soft tones she used to speak to me with. All I could recall was the odd, distant sound she made in that video. Maybe it was because I hadn't eaten, but my stomach suddenly lurched. I practically crawled out of bed, rushing to the bathroom, where I vomited uncontrollably. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stood up, feeling as though I had thrown up everything inside me. In the mirror, my pale face was drained of all color, except for my red, bloodshot eyes. On the other end of the phone, Willow's concerned voice asked, "George, are you okay?" But the next second, I heard Makoto's voice. "Willow, I see you still haven't learned your lesson. I slumped against the wall and hung up. Then, I pulled out the SIM card from my phone, tossed it into the toilet, and flushed it away with everything else. Chapter 8. After I left, I dreamed about her often. In my dreams, it was always that snowy day when we first met. Her hat had been blown over her eyes by the wind, and she tripped, screaming as she slid forward. I didn't have time to react, so when she crashed into me, I instinctively caught her. We both tumbled to the ground, with me cushioning her fall, her face still covered by her hat. She stammered out a flustered apology. I winced, pulling the hat off her face. Even after 5 years, I still remembered the snow that day, glowing yellow under the streetlights, like golden dust falling from the sky. When I saw her face, I froze for a moment. Her long eyelashes blinked away the snowflakes before she raised her brows with a hint of a smile. Her cherry blossom pink lips curved like flowers blooming in winter. In that brief moment when our eyes met, I had only one thought. She was beautiful. That was my first meeting with Willow. But as beautiful as the beginning was, the end was just as ugly. I would always wake up from those dreams, caught between the warmth of the memory and the coldness of reality, unable to fall back asleep. Night after night, I lay awake until morning. I began suffering from insomnia, unable to sleep at all. Eventually, I started dreading the arrival of night. I couldn't stop myself from wondering what Willow and Makoto were doing at that moment, and it drove me mad with anger. I knew I was sick, but there was nothing I could do. Willow's betrayal felt like a knife lodged in my chest, pinning me to the cold, icy ground. All I could do was watch as the warmth drained from my body, my blood slowly freezing until only my heart remained encased in ice and blood. That went on for a month before I slowly realized something was wrong with me. So, when a headhunter contacted me again, I didn't turn them down. No one was going to save me. I had to save myself. The new company offered me a good position, starting as a vice president, but the work was endless, with late nights almost every day, and I often found myself working until 11 or 12 at night. I was so exhausted every day that as soon as I got home, I would collapse into bed and sleep soundly. I didn't even have time to check their posts flaunting their relationship anymore. Willow began appearing less frequently in my dreams, replaced by endless piles of reports, burying me like snow. After 3 months of non-stop work, I finally had 2 days off. When I saw Makoto again, I realized something. He no longer bothered me. I looked up, only then realizing that it had been a long time since I'd thought of Willow. Time really is the best healer. The wound I once thought would never heal had finally begun to scab over. Chapter 9. Despite my efforts to avoid any news about Willow, her name would still come up occasionally when I was out with mutual friends. Someone asked, "Aren't they supposed to get engaged soon? They've been together for a while now." I heard from a friend at the jewelry store that Makoto is having a custom diamond ring made. Another friend, who was closer to them, scoffed, "Yeah, right. Willow's practically being tortured to death by him. I doubt they'll last much longer." The first person asked, "Why?" The friend glanced at me, sighed, and said, "Because of Makoto's near-obsessive control. Anyone who's ever been with Makoto has been driven to the brink. The only time you get a break is when he's bored of you. Don't let his affairs fool you. His girlfriends don't have the same freedom. He strips them of every ounce of it, even forbidding them from speaking to other men. His control over women is suffocating. If Willow steps out of his sight, he follows her through the phone, humiliating her at every turn. I remember once, in front of all of us, he publicly humiliated Willow. She was on the verge of begging for mercy, but he wouldn't let up. He accused her of wanting to meet with us just to hook up with other men. He told her if she ever met with another man without his permission again, he'd make her life a living hell. The guy's a lunatic. Willow looks like she's wasting away. Her face is hollowed out. Honestly, she brought this on herself. I hadn't expected things to turn out like this. When I checked Makoto's social media again, sure enough, it was no longer filled with lovey-dovey posts. Now, it was mostly angry, expletive-laden rants, a clear sign that their relationship was in trouble, but it had nothing to do with me anymore. I thought about it for a moment and decided to block both of them. I used to check their updates constantly, but now, I felt like it was a waste of time. It was time for me to forget Willow completely and move on with my life. What I didn't expect was to run into her again so soon. After my vacation ended, I landed a new investment project. The target, Tunghua, David's company. As I looked over the investment proposal, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. What kind of twisted fate was this? In such a large city, with millions of people, I couldn't avoid her. I turned down the invitation to the evening business dinner. This project was extremely important for Willow, and she would definitely attend in person. Her mother had been a mistress who eventually took the place of her father's first wife, leaving Willow with 2 half-siblings from his first marriage. Over the years, her father had been busy as well, producing a few more illegitimate children. Originally, our engagement had been something her father had greatly approved of. He had hinted more than once that he intended to leave the company to the 2 of us. For the sake of our future, We worked tirelessly, expanding the business, working late into the night. Even after I left, Willow never gave up on that dream, but without my oversight, the branch she took over invested in a failed project, leaving them unable to recover funds, and the company's cash flow nearly collapsed. Now, she was desperate for this money to save her company, but I had no intention of seeing her. I thought the dinner would last late into the night, but only 2 hours later, my colleague stormed back, fuming. That Tunghua company is completely out of its mind. What happened? I asked, looking up. My colleague slammed the investment proposal onto the table, his face flushed with anger. Everything was going fine. Willow seemed professional enough, but her phone kept ringing, and she wouldn't answer it. Halfway through the meal, Mr. Zhang went to the restroom, and I sat next to her to discuss the next steps in the investment plan. I had barely spoken a few words when her boyfriend burst in, saw me sitting next to her, and slapped her across the face. Then he punched me, yelling something about how his woman wasn't someone a piece of trash like me could touch. My colleague, trembling with anger, pointed at his mouth and said, "Look what he did to me. I just got dental implants, and now they're cracked." I was speechless. That's over the top. You've only met twice. Right. Exactly. And her boyfriend forced her to slap herself, accusing her of being a flirt who was trying to seduce everyone. I barely know her. Is that guy brain dead or what? If it weren't for my dad stopping me from calling the police, I'd have made sure he spent a night in jail. In the end, the investment in Tunghua was withdrawn. The colleague Makoto had hit wasn't just anyone, he was the son of the chairman. The chairman had insisted his son start from the bottom to learn the business before eventually taking over. Since the chairman knew David, they didn't pursue legal action, but the investment deal was dead in the water. No matter how much Willow tried to salvage it, it was no use. Her company's cash flow collapsed completely, nearly leading to bankruptcy. In the end, it was David who stepped in to save it. From the time I called off the engagement until now, David had grown increasingly disappointed in Willow. He had only given her a chance because he believed in our future together. But now, it was clear Willow wasn't capable of handling the responsibility. David brought his son and daughter from his first marriage into the main company, clearly preparing to groom them as his successors. Willow lived in constant fear of being kicked out of the family, doing everything she could to curry favor with David. After begging and pleading, she finally got another chance to pitch for investment. And that's how we ended up meeting again. Chapter 10. When Willow and I saw each other again, we both froze for a moment. Although a few months had passed, Willow still looked the same from the outside. Dressed in a pearl white dress paired with a black knitted cardigan, she looked as elegant as ever. But I suspected that now, she couldn't pull off that effortless grace like she used to. She looked into my eyes, her expression complicated, and said, "How have you been these days?" I replied calmly, "Pretty good." Then, I said nothing more and turned to take my seat. Throughout the meal, Willow's gaze kept drifting toward me. She tried to strike up a conversation a few times, but I brushed her off every time. Even now, seeing her face still stirred anger within me. I attributed this feeling to the emotional scars from those painful days, not to any lingering feelings for Willow. Those had long been burned away during the countless sleepless nights I endured. During dinner, Willow's phone rang repeatedly. At first, she answered with quiet explanations, but eventually, she simply turned it off, her unease visible on her face. After a few rounds of drinks, the door to the private room suddenly burst open. Everyone turned to look, and there stood Makoto, flanked by 4 or 5 women in skimpy dresses, their bodies covered in tattoos. Willow's face turned pale as she stood up, grabbing his arm and pleading, "What are you doing here? Makoto, please, just go home." "Okay." Makoto shook off her hand and said, "You're a girl eating with so many people. It's not safe. Isn't it only right that I come help you drink a few rounds, or what? Did you do something you're afraid I'll catch you at?" His eyes scanned the room and landed on me, a mocking smile and anger flickering across his face. "Oh, I see. So you're sneaking off to meet your old lover behind my back." The vice president sitting next to Willow squinted at Makoto, rubbing his chin with a playful smile. Before Willow could say anything, he gestured to a chair and said, "Mr. Ito, please, have a seat." Makoto shot me a glance, then smirked as he wiped his nose and crossed his legs, settling into the chair. The women giggled as they draped themselves around the back of his seat. Makoto said, "Sorry for the scene. Willow is my fiancée." The people at the table were all seasoned business professionals. They greeted him with polite smiles, faces unchanged. "Such a talented man. With a successful couple like you two, you're bound to go far together." "Yes. When's the wedding? We'd love to attend." Despite their smiles, if you looked closely, there was a subtle awkwardness in their expressions. I overheard someone nearby snickering and shaking their head. What kind of occasion was this? Everyone here was dressed formally, ready to discuss business, but Makoto, as usual, was dressed casually, flaunting his entourage. If this were a nightclub, it wouldn't have mattered, but here, it was downright embarrassing. Makoto, oblivious, poured himself a full glass of Moutai, stood up, and raised his glass. Thanks to everyone for taking care of my Willow. I'll down this one first. Feel free to join. Cheers to Mr. Ito. What a drinker. Their words were full of praise, but their eyes were filled with mockery. No one cared about this meal or the drinks. They were here to discuss business. Makoto, however, was treating it like a street bar, throwing back his drinks and spouting nonsense. Willow's face grew paler by the minute, and she discreetly tugged at Makoto's arm several times. Enough. Please go home. Okay. Makoto didn't care. He only knew that Willow was here to secure an investment. So he used his usual tactics, going around the table to toast each person. After 10 or so drinks, it was clear he was drunk. He staggered, barely able to hold his glass, but still wore a goofy smile as he started addressing the executives like old pals. Brother, let me tell you, I'll down this drink for you. He leaned in close to one of the executives, whispering, Brother, if you like any of these girls, just let me know. All I ask is that you keep looking after our business. Heh. If you're up for it, I can send them all to your room later. The executive, a man with a beer belly, glanced nervously at his wife sitting next to him. She maintained a graceful smile as she interjected. We'll see. Makoto downed his glass in one gulp, then stumbled over to the next person. When he passed by me, he didn't forget to shoot me a taunting look. The message in his eyes was clear. Not only had he taken Willow from me, but he was also positioning himself as David's favored future son-in-law, ready to rake in more investments. I chuckled quietly and turned to look at Willow. Her face was beyond pale. It was completely drained of color. Tonight, she had thoroughly humiliated herself. Everyone here now knew exactly what kind of man her fiancé was, and naturally, they would question what kind of person she was, too. Although everyone kept up appearances, lavishing praise, when it came to discussing the investment, they all started making excuses about financial constraints. Even the two companies that had nearly closed deals suddenly changed their tune. No one told Makoto how embarrassing his behavior was. Everyone watched him like they were enjoying a joke, letting him drink more and more until he was so drunk he collapsed into a chair. The dinner ended, and people gradually left, ignoring Makoto, Willow included. Makoto eventually began vomiting, but nothing came out, leaving him coughing and retching violently. Willow just stood there, biting her lip, glaring at him with hatred. I couldn't help but find the situation ironic. She had thrown away 5 years of our relationship for this man, for what I once thought was true love, and now, it had all crumbled into nothing. As I left the room and walked out of the bathroom, I saw Willow leaning against the hallway, crying. When we were together, I could never stand to see her cry. Loving someone means never wanting to see them in pain. She cried pitifully, tears streaking her face, her body racked with sorrow, but I walked past her without a word, my face expressionless. Suddenly, she grabbed the corner of my shirt. George. Her voice was hoarse, probably from all the crying. She looked up at me, her expression one of utter misery. She said, How have you been? I smiled brightly and said, Pretty well. Work's going great, and life smooth. No complaints, though you, on the other hand, don't seem to be doing so well. Willow forced a bitter smile and wiped her tears with her sleeve. Yeah. I haven't been doing well. I thought being with Makoto would make me happy. When I was with you, I was always pretending to be the kind of wife you wanted. You were rational, driven, always working hard for the both of us. No matter how busy or tired you were, you always made space for me in your heart, letting me rely on you completely. You were like the perfect husband everyone dreams of, but you always had this tension, this distance that made me feel like I had to keep up a facade. I knew you wanted a gentle, kind, and caring wife, so I never dared to show you the real me. I was afraid that if you saw how flawed I was, you'd stop loving me. But Makoto, he's different. He's carefree, bold, not bound by societal norms. With him, I don't have to pretend. I thought being with him would make me happier. But now, I don't understand why I've only grown more miserable. I fell silent. Anyone could see why she was suffering. If you want to embrace recklessness, you have to be prepared to pay the price. Everyone has the freedom to choose, but they must also bear the consequences of those choices. If Makoto could shamelessly destroy someone else's relationship and mind, how could he suddenly become normal in other aspects of life? A person's moral compass isn't piecemeal. It's built from a foundational point and grows steadily from there. It's not a random collection of unrelated traits. Lately, I'd heard how much Makoto had tormented her. He flaunted his position at her company, parading around as her fiancé and even using the title to seduce women at the front desk. Willow loved me for my dedication and loyalty, but she couldn't let go of the indulgence and thrill Makoto offered. Some people are like that. They crave stability, yet yearn for the excitement of what they've never experienced. Willow crouched down, covering her face with her hands, her voice filled with regret. I regret everything, George. It was a pose of complete desperation and collapse. She said, We were so good together, and I ruined it all. I thought I loved Makoto, but now I realize I was only chasing a fleeting illusion. That illusion clouded my mind, and I never thought about whether he was worth such a high price. I've always loved you, George. It's always been you. Could you? No. I cut her off without hesitation, meeting her gaze. Willow had beautiful eyes, dark, soft, and framed by long lashes. I had once been lost in their warmth countless times, but now, they only made me feel sick. I said, "Don't disgust me, Willow." Willow's face went pale. I stepped past her and walked away. Chapter 11. Willow quickly broke up with Makoto. A friend mentioned it to me with a gleeful tone. "I told you they wouldn't last. Just look at Makoto, always fooling around, acting like a complete mess. Whoever marries him has to be blind. And you treated her so well back then, working yourself to the bone for her. Are all women like this? They don't want the guy who's committed and kind. Instead, they fall head over heels for the one who tortures them to the point of misery." I cut him off. I don't really want to hear about them anymore. Let's talk about something else. There was a time when I couldn't get over it, but after seeing Willow the last time, I realized I had moved on. That woman was never the one I truly loved. What I had loved was just a fantasy she had crafted. Still, the fact that Willow and Makoto broke up didn't sit right with me. Makoto was so obsessive. I doubted he'd let go so easily. Sure enough, a few days later, my phone exploded with messages from our group chat. I glanced at it and saw that they had posted screenshots of Makoto's social media posts. Damn, George, check out what Makoto posted. This guy is insane. In the screenshots, Makoto had uploaded dozens of photos of himself and Willow. The content so explicit it left nothing to the imagination. Strange devices, bizarre acts, things I had never even heard of. He'd written a long post to go with the pictures. The content as twisted as the images. The background to all this. Makoto and Willow had entered middle school together at the age of 13. The immature girls formed cliques and began picking on those who didn't fit in. What started as gossip quickly escalated into insults, and then into physical bullying. Willow, being the daughter of a mistress, became the target. Makoto wrote, "Willow, we've known each other since we were kids. Maybe you've forgotten what happened when we were 13, but I never will. You were cornered, slapped until your face was swollen, and it was me, who stood in front of you. I didn't move. Even as they kicked and punched me, I became their new target, willingly taking the beatings, even ending up in the hospital multiple times. But I also remember how you started trying to please them. The more they bullied you, the more you admired them. You even became part of their group, giving them money, running errands for them, and when they hit me, you laughed along with them. To you, I was nothing more than gutter filth, just like those girls said. They turned me into this monster. They've paid for what they did, but you'll never escape me. Not in this life. I'll die before I let you go." The post ended with 3 menacing exclamation marks, and even through the screen, I could imagine the manic expression on his face as he typed those words. This lurid spectacle quickly spread like wildfire, first through local chats, and then, somehow, it found its way onto Weibo. Suddenly, the situation spiraled out of control. Willow wasn't famous, but David was the head of Lu Group, and Lu Group was a household name across the country. A scandal involving a wealthy heiress and her depraved relationship rocketed to the top of the trending topics. Headlines like Willow and Makoto and Lu heiress's unusual desires were everywhere. The next day, Lu Group's stock price plummeted by 7 points at the opening. David, enraged, suffered a stroke, bedridden, half of his face paralyzed. He stepped down and named Willow's half-brother as the new head of Lu Group. The very next day, Willow's brother took over from David as chairman and immediately removed Willow from her position, appointing his full-blooded sister as the new executive vice president. It was clear to everyone that Willow, once the most promising heir of the Lu family, had been cast aside. She and I had once been David's dream team, but we had let him down too many times. For people like them, the most important thing is ensuring the survival of the company. It doesn't matter if the successor is male or female, has affairs, or lacks personal integrity. What matters is protecting the family's interests. But a woman who had been publicly humiliated and involved in such a scandal, that was stupidity. Stupid people can't protect their own interests, let alone the family's. Everyone knew Willow's brother would take revenge on her. His mother had been driven to death by Willow's mother, the mistress. Now that he had power, his payback was inevitable. Willow was finished. The day Willow showed up, it happened to be the last autumn rain of the season. The cold drizzle hinted that winter was near. I opened the door to find Willow standing outside. Her dress soaked through, her meticulously styled hair was wet, clinging to her face, making her look both beautiful and disheveled. I asked, "Why are you here? What do you want?" Willow looked down, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Where else could I go?" I remained indifferent. Willow was still David's daughter, the Lu heiress. I didn't believe for a second that she had nowhere else to go. She was just playing the victim again. I said, If you've got nothing important to say, I'm closing the door. Willow blocked the door, urgently saying, "Wait, I just need to say 2 things, go on." Then, Willow lowered her gaze and said, "I know how badly I messed up. When I was young, everyone called me the child of a mistress. Later, my dad's illegitimate children started popping up, and I'd often see my mom crying alone at night. I promised myself I would be a faithful wife one day." She smiled, but there wasn't a hint of warmth in it. "But I ended up becoming just like her. I was in so much pain back then. My father had so many children, and they all tried to destroy me in front of him. I lived in constant fear that I would lose everything overnight. Honestly, when I was with you, I really wanted to cut ties with Makoto forever. But when things got tough, I just wanted to throw it all away, to give up on everything. But I knew you wouldn't accept that. Then Makoto told me he could give me that feeling of not caring about anything, as long as I bowed to him. I was a fool. At first, I thought it would only be once, but I kept telling myself it wouldn't happen again, over and over." Her voice began to tremble, but I couldn't stop. The sensor light in the hallway flickered and then went out, leaving us in dim light. Tears shimmered in Willow's eyes. She said, "I know I wronged you, but George, I truly love you. I regret everything. Only now, after all this time, do I realize that I never loved him. It was just a twisted dependency. You've always been the one I loved. I'm begging you, please give me one more chance. I swear I'll never hurt you again. Think of everything we've been through." Willow had always been the apple of the Liu family's eye, adored and pampered all her life. I had never seen her so humble. To be honest, I believed that Willow had loved me once. I had seen that love in her eyes, but how deep could that love have been? She had chosen Makoto over me, the man who had dragged her into darkness. She had come to me only after all her indulgence had left her empty. Her love was too cheap. The truth was, she had only ever loved herself. Willow reached out to take my hand, but my eyes landed on the marks on her wrist. Red scars stood out starkly against her pale skin. I froze and took a step back. "What are those?" I asked. Chapter 12. Things didn't end as quickly as I had expected. In fact, they escalated to an even more dramatic level. Netizens, with their incredible sleuthing skills, uncovered yet another layer of the story behind Willow and Makoto's breakup. My mom works at the city hospital, and word is that the Liu heiress came in for a checkup and tested positive for syphilis. It's already at stage 2. The comment section was filled with responses. "Serves her right, playing around like that. Who else would get it if not her?" Then, a familiar avatar posted a shocking revelation. The disease was transmitted by the guy. I know the girl in real life. She had a boyfriend for 5 years, and they were about to get engaged. Their relationship was great until this guy stole her away. But this time, they broke up because they had a fight. The guy got mad, went to a bar with some friends, brought along a bunch of random people, and ended up catching something. The girl had no idea and got infected. At first, she thought it was just an allergic reaction. By the time she found out the truth, it was too late. She checked the bar's surveillance footage, and the guy couldn't deny it anymore. The girl was furious and broke up with him. It's really a story where everyone's at fault, except for her ex-boyfriend, who's just a real victim. I stared at the post for a while before realizing it was from a mutual friend of Willow and me. Back when we had broken up, he had taken my side, angry on my behalf. So, it had to be true. I never imagined the situation was like this. The internet exploded. 4 days, both Willow and Makoto were trending, with people condemning their messy, immoral lives. Friends around me were talking about it too. They were socially dead. The last time I saw Makoto was at the hospital. I was visiting a friend who had been hospitalized, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized the person lying there. In a cramped 6-person ward, each patient had family surrounding them, offering comfort. Only Makoto was huddled in a corner, completely alone. He had lost so much weight that the hospital gown hung loosely off him, his collarbone sticking out sharply, despite being wrapped tightly in his clothes. His exposed skin was covered in red sores, some even ulcerated. Once so arrogant and full of life, now he looked like the walking dead, staring vacantly at the ceiling. The other patients looked at him with strange expressions, whispering among themselves. Behind me, I overheard a patient arguing loudly with a nurse. "How could you put us in the same room as someone with a dirty disease? Who knows if he's contagious? And who knows what else he has? He's rotten to the core at such a young age." The men spat on the floor, muttering, "What a filthy bastard." Makoto didn't react at all. He remained motionless. It wasn't until I was leaving, after visiting my friend, that he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, a far cry from the arrogant tone he used to have. "George, I still won." He stared at me with sunken eyes, his cheekbones sharp and ghostly, like a demon crawling out of hell. He let out a rasping laugh. "I got Willow, and you didn't. She'll never escape me, and in the end, I'm the one who won. I won't let her go. Even if you try to get back with her, I'll make sure she never forgets me. I'll always be there, a shadow she can never shake." Looking at him now, I didn't feel anger anymore. Instead, I was filled with a strange mix of emotions, pity and something more complex, a sense of imbalance. This man had spent his entire life chasing revenge. He hated Willow but also loved her in a twisted, obsessive way. She had become the pillar of his life, the only thing keeping him going. It was as if he had never lived for himself, only for others. I calmly replied, "If thinking that makes you feel better, go ahead." Then I closed the door behind me and walked away, his raspy voice screaming after me, "George." There was the sound of something crashing to the floor, followed by more cursing. "Shut the hell up." As I walked down the hall, I spotted a familiar figure at the pharmacy counter. The figure looked vaguely familiar, though drastically different from what I remembered. "Willow," I called hesitantly. The person froze, then slowly turned to look at me. The once bright, soft eyes, like a tranquil lake, were now dull, lifeless. She recoiled, hastily pulling up a scarf to cover her face, and fled as if in terror. I stood there, stunned. Willow had always been cold, aloof, and stunningly beautiful. I had never seen her look so disheveled. Her appearance hadn't changed much, but the energy that had once radiated from her was completely gone, leaving her a hollow shell. After discovering her illness, Willow never came to see me again. Maybe she had finally understood how I felt, or maybe she didn't want me to see her in such a sorry state. I heard that her brother had thrown both her and her mother out of the house, not leaving them a single penny. In the end, David had felt sorry for his favorite woman and daughter. Rumor had it that he regretted what happened and tried to regain control of the company. But it was too late. His eldest son had already secured his position within the company's upper ranks. Taking advantage of the scandal, he quickly gained control of the board and, in turn, the entire Lu Group. He spared no expense to keep David in a private hospital, earning him a reputation for filial piety. But everyone knew it was just a gilded cage. The power shift was complete. David's era was over, and there was no way he could protect the woman and daughter he had once favored. Willow was not only cast out of the family but also stricken with this illness. By the time she realized it, the disease had progressed too far for treatment to be effective. From what I'd heard, the illness would eventually invade her bones and central nervous system, possibly becoming fatal. She had lost everything, the future that should have been hers, her health, and her place in the world. Having been raised in luxury, how could Willow ever survive such a blow? Friends had whispered about how miserable her life had become, but seeing her in person stirred a strange mix of feelings within me. But who could she blame? From the very beginning, these were all her choices, and she alone had to face the consequences. Chapter 13. When the ice on the lake in the park started to thaw, I received a call from the head office. They were opening a new branch in Italy and wanted me to be the president of the new company. I thought it over for a few days and decided to accept. For so long, my life had revolved around Willow. Now that chapter was closed, it was time to start fresh. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I looked out the window. The lights on the ground twinkled like stars, stretching across the landscape. Then, with a roar, the plane plunged into the clouds, obscuring everything below. For a moment, nothing was visible. When I opened my eyes again, a beam of orange light was streaming in through the window. I turned slightly to the side. Outside, the sky was ablaze with the glow of dawn. The darkness of the night had been left behind, and the sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding into the small window and bathing me in its warmth. I smiled and took out my phone, capturing the moment. The day had finally begun.